Swamp Thing, a DC comic book superhero that started to appear in the comic books in 1971 and really seemed to hit its mark by the mid-80s thanks to the great work of Alan Moore and others. But to a lot of non-comic book readers, they really got to know Swamp Thing thanks to the live-action film in 1982, written and directed by Wes Craven.
Here comes trouble.
After the release of the movie, the film was put into high rotation on paid cable channels like HBO. With that and the booming video market, Swamp Thing became a cult classic. In 1989, a straight-to-video sequel titled The Return of Swamp Thing, starring Heather Locklear, was released.
The big green guy is back.
They call me Swamp Thing.
You're a plant, aren't you?
A few years later, in 1990, the USA Network aired the live-action Swamp Thing television series.
Please, bring her back.
Bring her back?
Yes, there's still time. You can do it.
You're out of your mind, Arcane.
Around the same time, Dick Animated Series released what they hoped would be the Swamp Thing for kids, with the Swamp Thing cartoon series.
Swamp Thing! Swamp Thing! Earth really needs you!
After being turned down by CBS, Fox picked up the series. To help promote the cartoon series, Kenner picked up the action figure toy rights. Kenner would put $6 million into the action figure line, feeling they had a big hit on their hands after testing it with young kids who said they liked playing with the Swamp Thing toys more than they liked playing with G.I. Joe or even the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Get ready for thrilling action when evil unmen battle Swamp Thing. Who can stop them from destroying the Earth?
Swamp Thing!
Kenner released the action figure line in early 1991. That first action figure series made up of 11 action figures, 2 vehicles, and 2 playsets. The cartoon series premiered a few months before the action figures hit stores, on Halloween, October 21st, 1990 on Fox. And after only 5 episodes, the series was canceled, with the final episode airing May 11th, 1990. Kenner had already planned for the cartoon and toy series to be a huge hit, and had already started work on a series 2. With the show being canceled, Kenner pushed on, watching the sales of Series 1 and hoping they could still do a Series 2. But it was clear Swamp Thing was in trouble. The cartoon was long forgotten, and the toys were hitting clearance sections at the local stores. By late 1991, Kenner wasn't ready to give up just yet, as they showed off Series 2 line to retailers in their 1992 Kenner catalog. Those new figures shown in the category was Constricting Swamp Thing with his tree branch weapons. This Swamp Thing had more of a brown look. Scorcher, one of the villains from the U-Men team. The character never appeared in the cartoon. If the body looks familiar, that's because it was used for the RoboCop Ultra Police Force figure of the same name. Yep, they even reused the name. The weapon was also seen in the RoboCop line and came with Claw. Alligator Swamp Thing. The figure would transform into an alligator figure and come with a gun made out of a log. The figure was reused for the G.I. Joe Mammals action figure line. Deflatiator Arcade. Man, I hope I said that right. This was another new villain that was taken from the RoboCop action figure line. Without the cartoon series to help promote the line, and the sales of Series 1 not doing well, Kenner pulled the release of Series 2, and the world never got to see more Swamp Thing action figures. The line is now beloved by many adults that played with it as a kid. The work on the line was always top notch, and you can tell a lot of love and care went into the action figure line. It's sad that we didn't get more figures from Swamp Thing.
Tonight on the NBC Sunday Movie, prepare for V, the most extraordinary miniseries ever made. A daring TV journalist struggling to uncover the startling truth behind the aliens' visit to Earth. And a beautiful and brave young scientist fighting for the very survival of the human race. Together, they take you on a fantastic journey to meet the Visitors.
For 2 days in May 1983, our living room was invaded by reptile aliens thanks to the NBC miniseries V. They came in 50 huge ships that hovered over the major cities, and their leaders appeared on top of the UN building in New York City, reaching out for friendship across the galaxy. Of course, the governments of Earth accepted their friendship, and soon the visiting leaders began to gain considerable influences with the humans. This was science fiction, and if it's one thing we've learned from science fiction, never trust the friendly arriving aliens. Over the 2 days, the humans, or at least some of them, would come not to trust the new friends from outer space. Those untrusted humans started up the resistant movement. After 200 minutes, the exciting television miniseries ended with the visitors taking control of Earth. A classic cliffhanger. And the miniseries was a huge success, paving the way, of course, for a second miniseries. That following May, V, The Final Battle.
Wondered what beings from another world would look like. And then, at the moment of meeting, we learned they were just like us.
He doesn't even look like Mr. Spock.
We have come because we need your help.
This time it would take them 3 days to fight the visitors. The second miniseries was again another hit for NBC. And a lot of fans and critics found this one even better than the first. So NBC was sold. They wanted more. So they ordered up the series for the following year. The first episode aired October 26, 1984, almost a year and a half after the end of the second miniseries. With the two beloved and high-rating miniseries, how could this fail? The miniseries were big-budget special effects, but the TV show had to either cut back or find a way to pick up extra sales. So they did both, cutting back on the special effects and making a deal with toy company LJN for the rights to produce the toys. LJN was thrilled to get their hands on one of the most talked about new television shows of the season. They went right to work to make the action figures based on the television series and a 12-inch doll line. LJN wanted to get the toys on the market as soon as the series premiered. However, it was going to take a lot longer than they thought to get the action figures ready. So their plan was to release a 12-inch doll-sized alien and by season 2 have the action figures ready to go. LJN released The Enemy Visitor. What looked to be a normal Ken-like Barbie doll was in fact a reptile alien with a human face mask and sunglasses. LJN was ready for kids to take over the world. Then came the premiere of the V television series, and fans were left wondering what happened to the great writing and storytelling seen in the miniseries. As each episode aired, fans found cheaper special effects than the miniseries and often overused stock footage from the miniseries, and even at times, stock footage used from the episode the week before. And the story was also lacking as the drama, humor, and suspense ended and became what one critic would call Dynasty with lizard makeup and laser guns. With each passing week, fans turned off the series and the ratings tanked. Going into 1985, it was clear to LJN the show was in trouble and would most likely not return for a second season. The V Alien doll was already not selling at stores and losing the company money. So not to lose any more, LJN canceled the planned action figure V line. That line was to include 4 action figures that would stand 4.5 inches tall, 2 humans heroes, Donovan and Kyle, and 2 aliens, Dana and a visitor trooper. Also would be 3 vehicles. The Resistance Firebird with hidden weapons, the Enemy Visitor's armored Jeep with marine gun, and the Shuttlecraft with moving weapons, a landing gear, and wing doors. So that was it. LJN pulled the plug on the action figures, and after 19 episodes, NBC pulled the plug on the series. Fans of the miniseries and the television series never got their action figures. Well, not if they lived in America, but if they lived south of the US border, they did get V action figures. They come from an unnamed Spanish toy company. These were not the best figures for details, and are cheaply made. The cards are bland with nothing on the back at all, and the figures themselves, they're not even named. Some of them even look like they're humans melting. However, if you long for some V action figures, these are out there if you can find them. Now, let's get on with it and talk about the unreleased Alien and a Predator toy line. First, let's go to the late 70s. Alien was a big hit, and Kenner did release an Alien toy. You can see it over there in the corner, missing some parts, but it's a great looking Alien figure. But when Kenner released that and some other toy lines from the R-rated film, parents weren't too happy. Now, the cool kids that saw the Alien movie, that's right, only the cool kids got to go see the Alien movie. They didn't mind the toy. They loved it. And if they had cool parents that took them to see an R-rated cool movie, they probably didn't care that they had a toy based on an R movie. But a lot of grumpy parents got upset and complained. Guess times don't change. If somebody releases a toy somebody don't like now, they'll get on social media and complain until they get it canceled. Well, in 1979, some uptight parents got the Alien line canceled from Kenner. Like I said, they released the big Alien, but there was planned to release a smaller line that matched the scale to their Star Wars toy line. Now, if you're thinking you've seen these before at stores, it's because Super 7 took the molds that Kenner had and released them. So in a way, we did get the planned Alien line, but we didn't get it in 1979 as planned. Let's take a look at what we almost got. What you see here is prototypes of the 5 figures that were planned to release by Kenner. The planned size was going to be 3 3/4, just like the Star Wars figures. To be released was going to be Ripley with the flamethrower, Dallas with a flamethrower, Ash with a motion tracker, Ripley in her spacesuit, and an Alien figure that was going to be more to the scale. It was going to be 4.5 inches tall and have a retractable inner tongue. Well, if you're a fan of Aliens, you didn't get that toy line. Sad, sad, sad. I mean, you could have got your Alien figure and your Ripley and your Dallas, and you could have made them say quotes from the movie. One thing great about the film, so many good quotes. You could get your Ripley figure and make it say, "Not you! You're not gonna take my crew today, alien!" That's my favorite. That's probably my favorite quote. Or when the alien busts down the door and says, "Alien! Alien!" That's also probably one of my good quotes. But another good science fiction movie in the 80s was Predator. And we never got any Predator toys until way after the movies were released into the 90s. Why didn't we get a Predator toy back when the film came out? Well, in 1987, we almost got it thanks to a toy company called Diamond Toys, not to be confused with Diamond Select. Let's take a look at a prototype of that Predator figure we almost got. Stephen Wang, who did the special effects makeup for the Predator in the film, was asked to produce a prototype of a Predator action figure. The prototype was a little over 9 inches tall, but would have been scaled down to around 5 inches if the figure got produced. It would feature a removable helmet, a laser cannon, backpack, and wrist blades. But it seems the toy was done so late in the production of the film that the toy company decided at the last minute not to produce the figure in case the movie flopped and they lost a bunch of money. As for the original prototype, well, it's owned by Joel Silver and proudly sits in his office today. Stephen Wang, who designed the prototype, was allowed to make molds of it for himself, and since then, several copies of it have been sold and traded within the garage kit community. With this figure, I was really amazed by the detail, but when you find out who worked on the prototype, you can kind of understand. But he really put his heart and soul into making this Predator figure that sadly we didn't get. I would have loved to have a Predator toy line back in 1987. Well, looking back now I would, but in 1987 I had moved way away from toys. So maybe I wouldn't have loved it then, but now I would love to know that we did have Predator figures in the 80s. Well, what about an Alien figure made by Matchbox? Yeah, that company that makes little cars that you can put in your shirt pocket. Yep, they almost made an Alien, kinda. They released in the late 80s a 9-inch doll figure called Max. This was kind of a doll figure that you made yourself. I guess it was kind of like, how Barbie comes with different clothes to change? Well, Max was supposed to be a special effects artist, and you could change him into other famous movie characters. They did release only one in this line, one that you could transform into Freddy Krueger. But there were 3 costume sets planned, and actually shown on the back of the box. Out of those 3, there would have been a costume for Frankenstein, Dracula, but best of all, a snap-on alien outfit. Once again, we have to blame those upset parents, as they wasn't happy about a Freddy Krueger doll for their kids. Damn, parents ruined everything in the 80s, didn't they? Used to be those over-religious parents ruining everything in the 80s, and now it's those 20 to 30-year-old millennials that want to ruin and cancel everything. No matter what decade you're in, someone's going to get upset if you want to have fun. Unless maybe you're Cyndi Lauper. So, what else can we look at? What about trolls? Yeah, we're going to talk about trolls. You remember those little dolls? They were naked, had a hair sticking up like Don King. Well, did you know they almost released an alien troll? You think I'm joshing with you. I'm not. They almost did a whole movie line of these. We would have got one based on the Joker, Batman, and yes, an alien. In 1982, Hasbro released Battle Troll action figures and vehicles. They were taking the troll concept and trying to sell it to the boys. Hasbro had a plan to expand the line in 1993, and they were shown off at that year's Toy Fair, but never released. These figures looked a little better than the Battle Trolls that were released, and they were going to take the rights they already had to some popular films to turn them into trolls. As you can see here, we have a troll Joker. I'm not really sure who the other ones in the photos are, but if you look at the bottom of the picture in the center, yep, you guessed it, an alien troll. Okay, I said I was going to stay in the 80s, and that last one was more of the 90s, but when else am I going to get to talk about trolls? Especially a troll that looks like the Joker. Let's talk about this toy here that never got released by Kenner. First, let's go back to 1975. Jaws became a monster hit, or should I say it became a shark hit. Jaws was the big summer movie. It kicked off the summer blockbuster. And of course, everyone wanted to make money on Jaws. They were shirts, they were rubber sharks. And of course, probably the most famous toy related for Jaws merchandise is Idol's Jaws game. This was a game with a shark on it, and you would put pieces, you would have pieces in its mouth and try to pull them out before the jaws of the jaws clamp shut on you. And this toy sold huge. Almost every kid in the mid 70s had this, or at least wanted it. While Ideal was raking in the money, Kenner was over there scratching their head. What could they do? They wanted the next summer blockbuster. And then in 1977, of course, they got Star Wars. But at the time of 1977, they didn't know Star Wars would be the next big hit. So they were looking at other movies to bring over, at least to their game side division. So they looked to see what the next blockbuster horror film was that was coming out. And they saw that a movie was coming out for 1977 that was saying they were going to do what Jaws did for the ocean to the roads. This movie, of course, was called The Car, starring James Brolin. Yes, you know, Thanos' dad. So what was this movie, The Car? Well, think Quentin Tarantino's Death Proof, but without a driver. This was a car, no driver at all, and his favorite thing to do besides eat gas was run down people, kill people walking in the streets.
There was no driver in the car.
A car possessed.
I know why he didn't go into the cemetery. The ground was hallowed.
Although the movie seems very violent, it is a PG movie, unlike Jaws, which was rated R. So Kenner thought, hey, with this hit movie this summer, we're gonna make a lot of money selling The Car game. So what exactly was this game? It was a very simple game to play. You put the car at the top of the ramp. Players would take their turn spinning a wheel, and then you would select objects to be placed at the bottom of the ramp. The weight of those objects would set off a trigger holding the car, and the player who set off that trigger became the victim. But it seems like everyone was a winner because everyone would be thrilled to watch the car speed down the ramp and crash through all the items that was placed in front of it. They were park benches, street signs, and all kinds of stuff, but no humans. And I don't know about you, if this thing got released, believe me, my Star Wars action figures would have been placed in front of it. And the car would have slammed into a hammerhead, no doubt about it. Sadly, the game was never released, and as far as anyone's ever seen is this ad. No prototype or anything has ever been discovered. But it looks like a lot of fun. These kids don't know how lucky they were. They got to play with this toy that never ever got released. Or either that, or they just sat in front of this blue table and made a goofy face, and then someone airbrushed a prototype of the game in front of them, because it looks kind of like a drawing. But as you can see, a prototype must have been made, because this doesn't look like artwork, and it's got a little hand showing you how it works. And it got as far as a box being designed. So this thing was very close from being released. If your sister's cousin's nephew, roommate's brother-in-law work at Kenner and he has this in his basement, let me know. Now, if you're a fan of this movie, you might know that Earl, I think that's how you say it, E-R-T-L, Earls? I never knew how to pronounce it. Anyway, in 2003, they released a toy of the car. And that replica today sells for a few $100s on eBay. So why didn't Kenner release this toy? As violent as it seems for a toy released by a toy company, but I guess it's not much different than a shark that tries to eat little kids' hands off. Although there's no official information of why this toy never got released, we can only assume it's due to the box office of the film. The movie wasn't the big summer blockbuster that Kenner had hoped for. The film was panned by critics, but what do the critics know, right? It got a 28% on Rotten Tomatoes. The movie only made about $2 million. Now, I couldn't really find out what the budget was, but still, 2000 wasn't a big hit for sure in 1977. In fact, in the top movies of the year, it was number 70, so that should tell you, even with profit, how big of a success this movie was. But the movie has gone to have kind of a cult classic. And it's become one of those movies that's so bad, it's so enjoyable to watch. And there was actually a sequel made to it in 2019, 42 years after the original release of The Car, called Car: Road to Revenge. Never saw it, don't know when, never even heard of it until I made this video. But James Brolin The Car is a cult classic. And it's too bad that we never got the Kenner game, because it looked like a lot of fun. It looks like one of those games I wouldn't really play as the game the way the instructions told me to. I would put the car on the ramp, find whatever I could in my room to stand up in front of it, and let it cruise down the ramp and bust into anything. Sadly, it never got released. No prototypes or anything has ever been found of it. But who knows? Maybe in someone's basement, it's sitting there today, just waiting to go down a hill once again. When Mattel lost its bid to Kenner for action figures based on the DC superheroes, they jumped to Marvel for a line of action figures from the Marvel Galaxy to compete with Kenner's superpowers. Marvel did, however, have some rules. They wanted the action figures to be based on Secret Wars, as they had test marketed that title and found it was very popular with young boys. Roger Sweet, the creator of Masters of the Universe, was picked to oversee the new Marvel Mattel action figure line. Although the action figures were very well done, they were done cheaper than most of the action figure lines done by Mattel at the time. The characters would only have 3 basic body types, so any figure that would need a special bigger or smaller body was not allowed. Series 1 was done and released, giving kids Wolverine, Captain America, Iron Man, Spider-Man, Dr. Octopus, Dr. Doom, Kang, and Magneto. The line sold pretty well for Mattel, and in early 1985 Series 2 hit stores. Series 2 would be Falcon, Hobgoblin, Baron Zap, Spider-Man in Black, and Daredevil. However, Series 2 didn't sell as well, as these characters didn't play a big part of the Secret Wars comic and was kind of lesser known to kids not reading the comics. So the line was canceled by Mattel so fast that 3 figures planned for Series 2 never hit the US. When the line was canceled, Mattel released the remaining 3 figures in Europe: Constrictor, Electro, and Iceman. Even if Series 2 ended the line, Mattel was already looking at Series 3 when they were starting production for Series 2. When it comes to Series 1 and 2, each figure would come with its own shield that had a photo that would change depending on the direction you looked at it. Each shield would show a hero fighting a villain. Sadly, we never have seen any prototype figures from Series 3, but it seems we do have artwork for the shields that was planned for Series 3, and that gives us a look at action figures that would have been in Series 3. Mr. Fantastic, the Abomination, Unreleased, Thunderball, the Incredible Hulk, and 2 female figures, Mystique and Dazzler. Let's take a closer look at the artwork for the shields. First, the hero shields. Here's Dazzler. Dazzler versus Unreleased. And here she is again fighting Constrictor. And another shows her fighting unnamed villains. And here she is fighting some bars. And last we have her fighting Abomination. Here's Mr. Fantastic. And Mr. Fantastic fighting Abomination. And here's Mr. Fantastic versus Doom Roller. Then we have Mr. Fantastic versus Electro. and Mr. Fantastic fighting some nameless villains. We also have another one of Mr. Fantastic versus Abomination. And here he is fighting Hobgoblin. And then just Mr. Fantastic by himself. In the villain series of S.H.I.E.L.D., we have the Abomination. The Abomination fighting a building. The Abomination fighting Captain America. And here he is fighting a wall. This artwork here shows him fighting Hulk. And another one shows him fighting Wolverine. And then we have Unreleased. And here he is. And here's one of him fighting the Hulk. And one of him fighting a base. And then there's one of him fighting Captain America and Dazzler. There's even artwork of him fighting Spider-Man. And now let's take a look at Thunderball. Here he is by himself. But he also would fight a bike. Or Captain America. Or how about Thunderball versus the helicopter? Here he is fighting Spider-Man and Iceman. And then a wall. There also was a plan for some mini-rig type vehicles, which would probably have came with a figure also. Here's Iron Man in his little mini-rig vehicle. And Captain America and the Constrictor. There's Daredevil right there. And let's take a look at Mystique getting some action done on her little Segway looking thing. And then there's Spider-Man. And here's Electro. Don't forget Dr. Doom and Wolverine. There was even some little gliders planned. Here's Mystique in her glider and Spider-Man in his glider. Sadly, we never got a Series 3 of Secret Wars. The line was canceled, but many kids growing up in the 80s have a fond memory of this action figure line. It became one of those few action figure lines that could be considered a cult classic. It didn't sell well at the time, and now it's pretty universally loved by not only Marvel fans, but action figure fans also. We're going to talk about released and unreleased toys from one of the best television shows of the 80s, The Greatest American Hero. And yes, before you say in the comment, the main star of the show did audition to play Luke Skywalker. Now that we got that out of the way, let's talk about the Greatest American Hero action figure. For those out there that might not know, what is the Greatest American Hero? Well, it was a comedy drama that aired during the 80s, actually from 1981 to 1983 on ABC. And it starred William Catt as Ralph Hickley, who found a superhero costume left by aliens that he could put on and become a Superman-like hero. He could fly, treble strength, everything a superhero would have. The only thing wrong here, the aliens didn't leave the instructions to the costume. So he had to kind of figure it out as he went along. And he was a bumbling fool, and we have bellyaches for laughing so hard. It also starred one of the sexiest actors of the 80s, Robert Culp, and the unforgettable Connie Selica. Although the series didn't have really a final ending, they did come back in 1987, where there was a planned reboot to star a female Greatest American Hero. The pilot episode served as kind of an ending to The Greatest American Hero, where you find out that the whole world found out about Ralph and his superpowers, and this upset the aliens, who somehow made everyone forget that he had superpowers, and then Ralph was given the task of finding someone new for the costume, and that new person was the female version of the Greatest American Hero.
I'm gonna make you really proud that you chose me. You too, Bill. Is this wild or what?
'Cause sometimes things work out just like you planned.
And not only was this one of the best comedy dramas of the 80s, had one of the best theme songs of the 80s, which today is probably more popular than the television show itself. Now that we talked about the show and that theme song that we all know, let's look at the released Greatest American Hero figures from Amigo. There was only one toy set released. This was 2 figures that came with a VW Bug. And here's the 1981 The Greatest American Hero box set that came with the VW Bug, 2 figures, the hero, Ralph, and his buddy Bill. Let's take a closer look at Ralph, the hero of the show. Pretty good looking detail for 1981. Looks a lot like the actor that played him, and it's a decent looking figure. As for his BFF Bill, let's take a closer look at him. And here it is, again a decent looking figure. But if you ask me, it looks a lot like the Indiana Jones from the LJN line. The box for the car and the figures is very nice looking. Looks really great on display. On the back of the box was some cutout photos from the television show. And this toy is rare. It's not that hard to find loose on eBay, but it's going to run you a couple $100, probably around $500 to $700 depending on the condition. But to find this thing still in the box and mint in the box, it's probably going to run you about $5,000. I don't know about you, and even if I find this toy pretty cool, I think I could find a lot better ways to spend $5,000. Now you'll notice on the box that it teased an 8-inch Greatest American Hero action figure line, also from Mego. But where were they? You saw this toy at the stores and you wanted your 8-inch figures? You couldn't get them. Why? Mego never released them. Damn sad. The 8-inch Mego Greatest American Hero action figure line was to be released in either late 1981 or early 1982, most likely around the Christmas season of 81, but they never got released. But believe it or not, prototypes have made into collectors' hands. There's 3 different prototypes of the Ralph, the Greatest American Hero figure. Let's take a look at it. Here's the prototype of the Ralph action figure. And believe it or not, a toy collector found this at a local flea market in a dollar junk box. We know about 5 prototypes of Ralph that made it into collectors' hands. There's 3 different prototypes, 2 early prototypes and 1 final card sample figure. The final Ralph action figure has more colored hair to look like the actor. And here's the production sample that someone found, believe it or not, in Scotland. And what a forehead on this prototype action figure. I really hope Mego would have sized down this forehead before they released it. There's only 2 loose prototypes and 2 carded samples known to exist of the Pam action figure. So you got your Ralph, you got your Pam, but you need your Bill. How can you play with your unreleased, the Greatest American Hero action figure line without Bill? So let's take a look at the prototype for the Bill action figure. Heroes West Coast was able to get their hands on a carded sample of Bill Maxwell that they got from a former department store toy buyer. There is an earlier prototype of Bill with gray hair. As you can see here, the face doesn't look as much like Robert Culp, and if you look closely at the Bill figure, and if you're a nerd with way too much time on your hands, you'll notice that he's wearing boots from the Mego Dukes of Hazzard figures and a watch from the Chips action figure. Now, before you tell me about the Ralph figure that was released later, sometime in the 2000s, yes there was. Here it is. FX Show did release the Ralph action figure that had that familiar Mego look and the same package. And believe it or not, this one will cost you into the hundreds also. Now, there's no official reason why Mego didn't release this 8-inch line. Maybe the action figure box set with the car didn't sell that well, so they got worried about this one. At this time, the TV show was having nice ratings. I don't know if it was beating Silver Spoons in the ratings, but I'm pretty sure it did better than Gloria. So why did Mego get cold feet to release this 8-inch action figure line when it was so far in development? Well, sadly, we may never know. In 1985, toy company Sanrio, a Japanese-founded toy company best known then and today for Hello Kitty merchandise, wanted to take on the action figure market. Their planned line was action figure superheroes from the depth of the sea called Sea Creatures. These 16-inch figures were based on human versions of things found in the sea, from sharks to eels to even coral. Each figure would have come with removable armor and a ring with a hologram face for the kids to wear. Sanrio hoped they would compete with LJN's Thundercat figures released in 1985. The figures were designed by famed toy designer Rich Rowland, who had designed the Crash Test Dummy action figure line and the very impressive FX Freddy Krueger, among others. The action figures only got as far as the prototype stage, and there's been no official reason why the line was canceled. Let's take a look at those prototypes. Corral, the coral of the series. The figure would have a button to give him growing action. He would have came with 2 swords, a pistol, and would have came in a bright red color. Eel, the electric eel of the series. He would have came with a chest plate, and in the center would have been a hologram electric bolt. Hammerhead, the shark of the line. He also would have had a hologram in his chest plate. Octo, the octopus of the line. The figure would have came with a gun and removable armor like the other figures. Piranha, the piranha fish of the series. A button would be on the back of this figure to make its mouth open and close to show off its sharp teeth. And the last, Baron von Cutter. This was the barracuda of the line. He had a crab-like hand, and his weapon of choice was the harpoon. Overall, these figures really look great. It would have been nice to see how they would have looked finished, painted, and packaged. But overall, for a toy line not based on a comic, television show, or movie, a toy line all to its own, it looks really good. And the toy designer really spent details on the figure. This doesn't seem to be some cheap plan to get figures into the market. They really took their time designing the figures. 2 years later, LGN will come out with their own line of deep sea hero action figures, tiger sharks. But it would fail at the toy stores, with most toy retailers never even carrying them. Now here's one that's probably one of the dumbest planned action figure lines there is, Dallas action figures. This was planned by Mego, the same company that turned down Star Wars, the same company that released the Love Boat action figures. Well, they were going to release Dallas action figures. Now, apparently they also released some board games and card games and some other Dallas merchandise that didn't sell very well. So that canceled this action figure line, which I can say might be a good thing. What kid wants to sit around and reenact old deals gone bad between JR and Bobby Ewing? Another planned action figure line from Mego that I think would have been a very cool line is action figures based on the 80s cartoon Thundar the Barbarian. Thundar the Barbarian. Now, I'll be honest with you, I never watched this cartoon. To me, it always seemed like a He-Man ripoff. Now, I'm not saying the cartoon was bad or good. Just at the time, I was a one-trick kind of guy. I watched He-Man, so that's all I watched. But I know a lot of kids that loved this show back in the 80s. I think this figure line would have done good. I couldn't really find out any information exactly why the line was canceled, but the line was planned right about the time Mego was having financial problems and went bankrupt, so I'm sure that probably played into this not being released. Another one by Mego that was planned but never released was Logan's Run action figures based on the TV series. However, due to low ratings for that television series, the show was canceled after about 11 episodes. So, Mego canceled the planned action figure line. Years before he took a shower, and a few years before we were all asking who shot JR, Dallas star Patrick Duffy had his own television movie and TV series. Mark Harris was the lone survivor of Atlantis. That's where he was from, if you couldn't figure that out by the title of the show. What could this Patrick Duffy do? Well, he could breathe underwater and had webbing between his fingers. Other than that, I'm not really sure. He didn't talk to the fish and all that like Aquaman. And, to be honest, I don't know much about this show, never saw it and just read a little bit about it, but it didn't mention any other superpowers. But to be 4 television movies and a series, I'm guessing he had to do more than breathe underwater and have webbed fingers. In 1977, the show's producer, along with Patrick Duffy, headed to Cincinnati. There, they met with Kenner, the toy company we all know and love thanks to Star Wars and many other toys. Why did they head to Kenner? Well, Kenner was basing a line of action figures based on the television movie and the upcoming series. At this time, there were already 4 successful television movies, Man from Atlantis. So NBC said, hey, let's make this into an ongoing series. And Kenner was excited about making toys for the television show and put production in high gear, aiming for a release of 1978. Sure, Kenner was at the top of the mountain for Star Wars action figures at this time, but they didn't want to just sell Star Wars toys. They wanted to make sure to branch out, and making action figures based on a hit television show seemed like the best thing to do. Sure, the television movies got good ratings, but the television show didn't. After only 13 episodes, NBC pulled the plug on the Patrick Duffy Man from Atlantis. Without a television show to help promote the toys, what could Kenner do? They had no choice but to cancel the upcoming toy line. Let's look at that planned Kenner toy line. They planned to have 2 different lines, a 12-inch action figure line, much like their $6 million man line, and a smaller 3 3/4-inch action figure line, like the Star Wars toys. Let's look at a prototype for the 12-inch Mark Harris action figure. As you can see here in his nice yellow shorts, it's a retooled Kenner $6 million man action figure. As far as we know, this was the only action figure planned for this line, or at least in the early stages. The smaller line had a little bit more work done to it, but sadly, there's never been any photos of the Patrick Duffy figure. We only have a concept of one figure. Let's take a look at it. This is an action figure of Mr. Sherbert, the main villain of the show. If the face on this action figure looks familiar, well, that means you watched Batman back in the 60s, as he was famous for playing King Tut. There was plans for a submarine that you could really put underwater, and it was also a great playset. You can see here that it was made for the smaller figures in this Kenner work order. This would have been a very cool toy in the line for sure. Now there were some smaller vehicles also to go along with the small toy line, but most of these only got as far as we know to the sketch stage. Let's look at those sketches. Here's the vehicle, the Undersea Traveler. It sure would have been a lot of fun in the tub. And this sketch here shows some planned action figures that would have came with a playset. And one more sketch shows two different types of submarines. Now Kenner was the type of company not to let things go to waste. So once the television show was canceled, what did Kenner do with their plans for the Man of Atlantis action figure line? Well, they couldn't release it, so they retooled it into a whole new series, Scuba Squad. And the Scuba Squad was made up of a lot of plans that were in the Man of Atlantis toy line, including the submarine playset and some of the smaller vehicles. Even the logo from Scuba Squad is kind of a retooled logo for the Man of Atlantis. As you can see in this photo, some of the ships got very far into planning. For some unknown reason, Kenner canceled this scuba line, but it seems to be pretty far into production. Now, these photos will appear in Kenner catalogs and promotional material, but sadly, we never got this line either. So this is one of the few times I can think of where the action figure line was canceled twice. Anyway, that's a look at the unreleased Kenner Man from Atlantis action figure line.
But today we're going to look at 10 unreleased, or I guess you could call it unproduced G.I. Joe action figures. Some of these will be from the 90s. Most of them I think are from the 90s, maybe some 80 ones also. So let's just start with this planned Toys R Us exclusive 4-pack. There was going to be two different 4-packs, one for Cobra and one for the G.I. Joes. This was going to be an exclusive for Toys R Us, and in 1996 they showed up at the G.I. Joe convention and pre-orders were taken. However, the line was canceled in early 1997 when Hasbro decided in favor to release a large-scale G.I. Joe toy that was exclusive to Toys R Us. And here's a picture of a planned G.I. Joe trophy. Hasbro intended to produce these trophies and use them as promotional rewards, but for some reason they decided to cancel that plan. The figure is a pewter cast of Gung Ho. I did a whole video about the lawsuit with Gung Ho. Check that out. I'll link to it at the end of this video. And here we have a test shot of Dr. Mindbender that was planned for production in 1995. The 3/4 inch toy line was canceled, so the figure was never produced. Pictures of the unpainted hard resin copy and the helmet that would have been included with Dr. Mindbender, and there's a painted hard copy, which was most likely used as a paint master for the production color scheme. Here's a picture of Replicators. This would have been for the Star Brigade line. The story of the Replicators were that different characters would become hosts to an alien. The figures were planned for a 1995 release, but was canceled in 1994. The characters in this photo are Snake Eyes, Sci-Fi, and Duke. Also planned for a 1995 release, Ninja Commandos. However, once again, the G.I. Joe small line was canceled in 1994, and the Ninja Commandos were never released. They would have been 5 of them, as you can see here. Budo, Storm Shadow, Road Pig, Flint, Knockout. Rumors are that the Ninja Commandos actually got a production run of 10,000 figures. However, as of 2003, Hasbro has no record of this ever happening. Here's 2 robotic animal figures, a panther and a crocodile. The figures were originally going to be packed with the 1990s Eco Warrior figures, but the Eco Warrior figures came with water-firing devices instead. But not wanting a good plan to go to waste, Hasbro decided to pack these with the 1995 Battle Ranger figures. But once again, that line was canceled in 1994. Here's an unnamed and unproduced figure that was sculpted around 1987. This prototype figure is made from using other G.I. Joe parts, such as the legs are from Sci-Fi, and the forearm and lower leg molds are from Snake Eye. There's a hole on the back of the figure that would probably allow it to attach an accessory, which would produce sparks, moving parts, or some other kind of visual effect for the figure's torso. This would explain the opening in the torso and using the transparent plastic. And here's a look at Tiger Force, shown to the public in 1988, was made up of 7 members: Duke, Dusty, Lifeline, Recondo, Ripcord, Wild Bill, and an all-new figure, Sabretooth, was a repaint of Firefly. And here's a picture of the Baroness. She was going to be part of the 1995 Battle Corps Ranger assortment before the G.I. Joe line was canceled in 1994. Nice looking figure if you ask me. And the last one we have to show for you today is a picture of an unproduced Alien. It was intended for a 1994 or 1995 release, and it doesn't have a name. But it is pretty cool looking. But again, with the line canceled in 1994, you can kind of see why this one didn't get produced. Well, that's a look at 10 unreleased G.I. Joe figures.
Hey, Junkman channel popping though.
Thank you, sir, for that unsolicited testimony.